So Melissa, for some reason we can't hear you even when you're unmuted. But looks like we're just about ready to get started. I see folks popping in.
Yeah, we'll give people just a couple more minutes, maybe 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Can I hear you, Melissa?
I think we're about ready to begin.
All right. Thank you, Diane. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate you all taking some time out of your day to join us today for our development forum with the Department of Land Use and Transportation here at Washington County. I'm Stephen Roberts. I'm the Director of Land Use and Transportation here at the county. And that department includes our current planning, building services, our long-range planning functions, both transportation and community or land use planning, as well as our road engineering and operations, road operations work groups. We also do capital projects, build transportation improvements on county roads throughout the county. And so within that encompasses pretty much all of the development related functions that the county manages. And so I appreciate again you taking the time to be here. We're going to be focusing primarily today in the building and current planning world. And my role here today really is just to do an initial welcome and an introduction. Those of you who are repeat attendees will remember Andy Back was our Planning and Development Services Manager and used to be the host, if you will, for the meetings. Andy retired in August, and glad to see that he's able to move on and enjoy the next phase in his life. And I want to introduce today Aaron Wardell. Aaron is our interim Planning and Development Services Manager right now, stepping in for Andy. And then Aaron's also been with the county for about 7 or 8 years. Is that about
Almost
right?
9.
Almost 9, and has most recently been our principal planner for transportation planning. So I just want to welcome Erin, and I'm going to just turn over to her to go ahead and proceed with the meeting. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Stephen. I am going to start out by covering our development forum goals. So we want to share with you why we're all here today, for those of you who may not have been here before. So our goals for these development forums are really an opportunity for staff to share information with you that may be interesting and related to development services and initiatives. We also are here to hear from you. We're here to answer questions and hear any concerns. We want to find out more about how we can better support your needs. and then to build relationships between staff and customers. Now, that was a little bit easier to do when we were able to get together in person and talk a little bit more one-on-one or in small groups, but this is still a good way for you to see our faces and get to know who we are, and we can always follow up with you after this if you want to contact anyone. On the back of the agenda, you will find contact information for the staff who are presenting today. Next slide. So we have some principles established for our development forum, and they're listed on this slide. We are here, of course, to deliver value to you, our customers. We're here to, can we go back? I just skipped ahead to the agenda. We are here to be proactive, so we want to get ahead of some of the initiatives coming down the pipeline and let you know about them in advance. We want to be inclusive and better understand the diverse needs of all of our customers. We want to be efficient, and that's part of the reason for sharing all this information with as many people as possible at the same time. And we want to engage with you and hear more about your concerns. And we hope that it's interesting. We always strive to make these interesting and relevant to your interests. So let's move to the agenda slide then. Here we are. So we are covering welcome and introductions. We're then going to hear an update on our building permit status. We're then going to cover some interesting new topics of some state mandates that are coming down that we'll be implementing through our plan documents. We'll then talk about our building services and current planning service level assessment, and then there will be an opportunity for questions. We'll probably also pause in between each of these items and have an opportunity for questions right afterwards as well. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Derek Moon, our building plan review supervisor.
Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Derek Moon. I'm the Building Plan Review Supervisor, as Aaron stated. I'm going to give you a quick update on our staff. And I know everyone's concerned about our permit timelines or like to hear more about it. So one of our new Building Permit Supervisor, Casey Levy, will give us an overview of what's happening with our building permit status. Next slide, please. So one of our initiatives were to hire more staff to help people get their permits through the system a lot quicker. So I'm proud to announce that we've hired Casey Levy as our building permit supervisor, Sarah Johnson as a new building permit tech, and Derek Luckett as our building permit tech as well. So with that said, I'll pass it on to Casey, and she's going to give us an overview of what's going on in our permitting department. Casey, on to you.
Okay, excuse me. Good morning, everyone. Can we move to the next slide? So just a little bit of background. I came from Clackamas County in August, so I'm pretty new here at the county. And when I came on, there was a pretty big backlog of permits. We had some senior staff leave before I had come on. There were senior permit techs. That was a pretty big loss. They did retire. And we had a huge influx of permits. So when I started, to give you an idea, we had around 700 to 800 permits waiting in line to be processed, which is huge. Right now, we have about 200. So we've brought that down quite a bit. The delays are in intake and at file check. So right now it's kind of getting in the door, we have a backlog, and getting out the door, we have a backlog. Next slide, please. So right now, as of last week, we are about 1 week at file check. So that's going out the door. So once your project is all done with review, it's about 1 week to get out the door, which is pretty great right now. It's about 4 weeks to set up a new permit. Right now, we're working on permits from September 30th that were emailed to us. Our new staff are really being trained really quick. They're doing a really great job. They're able to do the really easy tasks that allow my permit techs that are more senior to, focus more on the plan review permits and getting those through the system. We have also brought back one of our retirees so she can help us work through our backlog. And then in December, we're going to be hiring one new person to kind of get us on our feet. A couple things that I have done to implement a quicker timeline is I have changed the way that we have handled our solar permits on intake. It's been a huge thing. We've got plenty of solars coming in. Almost, I'd say 5 out of 10 of the permits we get are solar permits. So we've made that process really quick for my permit techs, and they're able to issue them really quickly, which has really helped with our timelines. We've also made it so my staff can focus on certain tasks. I have a certain group that works at home for an entire week so they can just focus on our backlog. And I think that's really helped us get to where we are today. Next slide. And I think that is it. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Anybody wants to raise their hand in Zoom, we can unmute you to ask a question now, or you can hold your questions to the end. And I'll just wait a second to see if any hands pop up while people look for the button.
While we're waiting, I may just jump in. I really do want to express my appreciation to Casey and really the entire permit team. We were short-staffed for a while. It's a difficult hiring environment, I'm sure many of you know. And so we were really fortunate to have landed Casey and a couple of other great folks to backfill some vacant positions on the permit team. And I just can't say enough about how they've really pulled together and have really started tackling that backlog. So very appreciative of that. Thank you.
I will second all of those words. The permit tech team's been working really hard and doing a great job. Great, well, let's go ahead and move on to our next agenda item. We are just moving right on through it, which leaves a lot of time at the end if there are any questions. So I am going to turn it over to Teresa Cherniak, who is our principal planner for community planning, to talk about some of our new state requirements.
Good morning, everybody. I do have a presentation, so if we can load that up. So as Erin mentioned, there are a couple of state initiatives that we've been doing a lot of work on. One from rulemaking through developing and implementing our regulations. And then the other that we participated in rulemaking, and we're just going to need to start implementing now. So do we have the presentation, or should I share mine?
Just a moment. We're having one little technical difficulty with this. It'll be just a minute.
Okay. So the one that we have been working on for quite a while is middle housing. Many of you have heard of that, are thinking about developing it, have talked with us already. And then the other one is a climate friendly and equitable communities initiative that just recently in July, I believe, the state adopted the rules, and we'll be moving forward with that. So next slide, please. So first on middle housing, most of you know that there were two related bills that were passed over the last couple of years by the state legislature. One was House Bill 2001, middle housing. And middle housing, I have a slide, the next slide, but it is basically the range of housing types between single detached houses and multi-unit buildings. And the idea from HB 2001 was to encourage more of that type of housing so that there was a mix of housing in neighborhoods, and to increase the housing options in places that right now may be only single detached dwellings. We did this past year develop code amendments, and those were adopted through our engrossed ordinance number 885 in June. The second bill was Senate Bill 458. That goes further than to allow land divisions for these middle housing units in an expedited way. And expedited, I'll talk about in a little while, but 63 days rather than our usual 120 days. And then there are certain requirements and limits on what we can require and how we process those. The idea here was once middle housing is allowed, smaller units, maybe in smaller lots or smaller well, eventually they'll end up being able to be on smaller lots, but the idea is to be able to then divide those, and those then could be sold, encouraging more housing ownership. We did make some of the changes to implement that through that ordinance number 885, but the remaining requirements, mostly procedural requirements, and then some clarifications to our middle housing regulations, are going to be addressed in an ordinance that's going through our planning commission right now, ordinance number 890. Next slide, please. So just a quick refresher on what we mean by middle housing. This slide shows what was specifically in the bill. So duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses. And this slide shows them all separate, but the idea is that hopefully we'll see some of these all intermixed in a neighborhood, like some of our older neighborhoods in older parts of the cities in the county. So the main shift for the county, since we did already allow all of these types in our land use districts, our residential land use districts in the urban area, the main differences are that it'll be we'll be allowing more of these type of units. So the density caps won't apply. Lots right now that may be too small for 2 units today will be eligible for duplex. Townhouses will be allowed at 4 times last year's maximum density, since now we do allow them. So up to 25 units per acre. And then cottage clusters won't have any density maximum. Next slide, please. So in June, the board did amend the Community Development Code by adopting Ordinance 885. So it allows all middle housing types in all 12 of the county's urban residential districts. So this is an urban only allowance. We added definitions and amended definitions, added review procedures and standards for siting and design of the middle housing units. And we made some revisions to single detached housing as well for the design and siting. And then there were parking changes for middle housing. You can only require 1 parking space per middle housing unit. So those changes were made. We're always looking for ways to improve our code to make our standards clearer and more objective. So we did make some changes as we saw them in the standards that we were looking to change. And then one of the big things is the duplexes are allowed on all lots where a single detached dwelling is allowed. But there are some limits on the other middle housing types. So they are limited in natural areas and floodplains. And there are some lot size requirements. Again, no density, but there are some minimum lot size requirements in order to be able to do the middle housing. And you should take a look at our new regulations. They are in the Community Development Code for more detail about that. Next slide. So some of the notable provisions I'll just point out in the ordinance. There was an allowance in the state rules for plex units, so duplex, triplex, quadplex. Typically, most jurisdictions define those as being attached to each other. And the state rules allowed plexes to be considered detached units. And so that is included in our regulations. That was a big topic of discussion with our planning commission and the board. And they determined that in order to provide as much flexibility as possible and try to get production of middle housing units, that they wanted to allow them to be detached. We had initially considered requiring sidewalks for middle housing, but that did not get in the adopted regulations. So sidewalks are not required for middle housing on existing lots. However, it will be required for a land division. We do have a new regulation that requires dedication of right-of-way for middle housing and for other housing as well now. And then there was a model code, so a lot of what we took for the design standards were from the model code, but we did make modifications and simplified a lot of those. And then there is a clear objective approval path. So most of the middle housing units will be able to be done as type 1 applications. And the idea there is also to facilitate more of these units to be able to be built. Next slide. So the second part of this, the ability to do an expedited land division for middle housing. Again, some provisions were included in Ordinance 885, but most of the procedural parts of it and some of the detail of what's required is included in an ordinance that's going to the Planning Commission next week. So that's ordinance number 890. The SB 458 and the regulations that it that it refers to are very prescriptive. So they establish the timelines, the procedures, requirements, and limits. And some of the most critical ones, it's a 63-day timeline for approval. We have to approve these if certain requirements are met, and the standards are there in the bill as well as now in our ordinance. And then since this is not considered a land use application, there are limits on the appeals. So the appeals will go to the hearings officer, but they cannot go further up to the Land Use Board of Appeals. And it's pretty prescriptive as well on how we are to process the appeals and the timing of the appeals and who's able to appeal it. So if you're interested in that, please do look at our webpage and ordinances in progress for this ordinance. And for the other middle housing allowances, please do look at our code because they're all now in there. Next slide, please. So the other state initiated bit of land use planning that we're now looking at is the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. This came out of the governor's executive order in 2004. The executive order was to exercise any and all authority and discretion to meet Oregon's climate goals. So the State Department of Land Conservation and Development staff set about doing rulemaking, and the state did adopt amendments to the Oregon planning rules this summer. The rule changes were pretty extensive and touch on land use as well as building and transportation aspects. So they're far-reaching. The parking regulations are the first ones to be implemented and the first ones out of the gate. I will say there are some jurisdictions that are challenging the rulemaking, and they have asked for a stay actually on implementation. So we're following that, but we are going to be proceeding as the regulations require until we may not have to. So next slide, please. So as of January 1st of next year, the county and all urban jurisdictions are not going to be able to enforce minimum parking requirements in a couple of different instances. So one is where development is near frequent transit, and it does define frequent transit. So it's within 3/4 of a mile of rail transit stations. That would include MAX and West stations. And then 1/2 mile of frequent transit, bus transit, and that's defined as 4 or more buses per hour. We have done some mapping of these areas, and it is quite a large swath of the unincorporated area. We also can't require more than one parking space per unit in residential developments with more than one unit. And then it is pretty specific on no minimum parking for specific uses. That includes regulated affordable housing, childcare, group homes, small residential units, so less than 750 square feet, and shelters. Next slide, please. There is another batch of requirements that are effective June 30th. These are all related in some way or another to parking. Some are pretty big, including repealing all parking mandates or developing a parking management program. And others include changes related to car and van pool parking, bike parking, shared parking, and standards for parking lots. So the county's still sorting out how to move these forward. And beyond then this, there are a number of other requirements in the standards. Some of them do require that Metro weigh in and further develop or change some of their regulations. So stay tuned on that. I think we'll probably be bringing that forward once we know more about how that's going to happen. And that is the end of my slide deck. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
If anyone would like to raise their hand in Zoom, we can call on you. We did have a question come up in the chat relating to building permits, and so I'm going to wait until the next item to talk about that because that's our next agenda item. I don't see any hands going up. Okay, we can move on to the next presentation. People can always ask questions at the end if you have something related to that. So we have some slides for our next agenda item. We are going to be talking about our building services and current planning service level and funding assessment. This is a study that the county has been conducting over the last several months. It's really an opportunity for us to take a closer look at our the fees that we charge for building services and current planning and how those cover our staffing levels and our desired staffing levels. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So several months ago, the county undertook an organizational assessment, and the challenge that we are faced with is that our costs are exceeding our revenues for current planning and building services. Essentially, the fees are not keeping up with what we need in order to cover our staff. The work that we do is necessary to support safe growth and economic vitality in Washington County. Both of these work groups are enterprise funded, meaning that they're supported by user fees. They don't receive external funding sources. As a part of not having enough revenue coming in, we have been spending down the reserve accounts that we had built up, and we've been reducing staffing. When we say that, we haven't initiated layoffs of staff. When people have left due to retirement or getting a new job, we have done a careful assessment on whether or not we can backfill that position at this time. And so if you look at our org chart, we have a number of vacant positions that we've been holding off on filling because the revenues aren't keeping up with our costs. So what that's resulted in is overloaded staff and declining service levels. And that all fed into the backlog of building permits that I know many of you have experienced. So the goal of doing this assessment was to support county leadership in developing sustainable service levels going into the future and funding models for these work groups. Next slide. So the process that we undertook for this work was to hire a consultant to do an independent assessment. As a part of doing that assessment, they conducted a number of stakeholder interviews with developers, with our elected officials, and with staff. They reviewed best practices, including surveying 14 comparable jurisdictions, how they do their services and what their funding models look like. They then developed analysis and recommendations for our ideal service levels, workflows and process improvements, and then a more sustainable funding model to get us to that desired service level. So we are working on reviewing the final report from our consultant right now. It summarizes workloads, staffing, operations, and funding needs. So when we're done finalizing that report, we'll be sharing it with the Board of Commissioners at their November 29th work session. Next slide. So I can share with you now some of the key recommendations coming out of that assessment. And again, the final report will be available for that November 29th date. So if you want to really dig into it and look through all of the details, you'll be able to do that in the future. But this is the recommendations that will be coming out of that. Those recommendations fall into three different groups. The first is sustainable funding, the second is staffing and service levels, and the third is process improvement strategies. So under sustainable funding, the recommendation will be to increase fees in order to cover the cost increases that have outpaced our prior fee increases, to implement an annual fee indexing based on those cost increases so that we don't end up in the situation again where we've fallen way behind and we're not keeping up with our increased costs. And then to be able to rebuild and maintain those reserves in order to weather future normal up and down cycles. We all know that this is kind of just the way that it goes. There's going to be times when there's more revenue and there will be times when there's less. And so keeping a reserve fund balance is really critical to be able to weather those. The second group of recommendations relate to staffing and service levels. We want to make sure that we have enough staff to provide a good level of service to our community. And so based on an assessment of how many staff we need, we were able to come up with some calculations of what the fees may need to be in order to cover that. And so the report talks about service levels. It's time-based, so essentially how long it will take us to turn around permits that are coming in, plan reviews, building inspections, current planning, land development reviews, and based on the time, how many staff we need, and then backing that into the fees that we need to charge. And then finally, process improvement strategies. We know we can always do a better job with our processes. Coming out of COVID, we implemented a number of electronic solutions, for example, and so looking to the future and thinking about how we can take advantage of some of these new tools to an even higher level. We are looking at additional operational efficiencies, other types of process improvement opportunities, and just continuing to increase our efficiencies and effectiveness. Casey talked a little bit about some of the things we've already implemented on the building permit tech side, so we continue to look for ways to improve. And part of the benefit of having an external consultant do this work for us is they were able to look at those other jurisdictions and get some ideas for us and things that we would be able to implement in the future. So I think that's it for these slides. Next slide might just be the end. Okay, there we go. So that is what we have to say right now about our assessment work. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. We really breezed through all of our content agenda items, so we have quite a bit of time now if people want to ask questions. Looks like a couple have popped up in the chat. So the first question that was in the chat is, how is the county addressing rising building permitting costs? And so we just talked about that. So we did implement some fee increases in the last fiscal year. We are looking to developing that sustainable staffing model and thinking about the fees that we need in order to cover our staff going into the future. So we don't have the numbers yet of what we may propose to the board for our fee increases, but we do know that what we're charging right now is not covering the staffing level that we need to deliver our desired service levels. The next question we had in the chat is, as a builder developer, I would like to see building planning and engineering develop a streamlined communication process. That's really good feedback. Thank you for that. And that's something that we'll be taking a look at through future process improvement. Would anybody like to raise their Zoom hand? Oh, another question in the chat. If the county wants to increase affordable housing through middle housing, limiting permitting costs is essential. We do understand there's a lot of interplay between the fees that we charge and the costs for the end product that people are delivering. And so I think this is a future policy discussion that we can be having at the county and at higher levels than ours with our elected officials, of course, as well. But we still need to be able to pay the staff who process the various steps of building development.
Yeah, and I might just jump in and add to that. I understand certainly we're in a period of just rising costs across the board. And so obviously our costs are increasing, and so we have needs to ensure that we have the staff to provide the services that you all want and need. And so, within the context of just rising costs generally, we understand that it's just one more incremental cost potentially, paying the agency for the permits. But and I would just say that all building departments essentially charge fees for service, right? So that's the funding model for pretty much every building department or building services function in all of our jurisdictions in the state of Oregon. So we're not out of line in that regard, and in some cases our permit fees are somewhat lower than some of our comparator jurisdictions. And so I think we actually provide a reasonable value on return, but certainly understand the implications of permitting costs. So I appreciate that feedback.
It's a kind of a quiet group today. We don't have a whole lot of questions coming in. K.R. Culberson now has a question in the attendee list, so I think we'll need someone to unmute. I don't have that capability. Could Diane
Go
or
ahead and ask your question.
thanks, Diane.
It looks like they put it in the Q&A.
Okay. As a nonprofit developer, I'm wondering whether there are plans for accommodating fee reductions for affordable housing. At this time, it's not something that we are specifically considering. We are looking, of course, at that overall fee assessment, and so that may be an opportunity to consider some factors like different types of developers or some kind of a scaling of various fee increases. And so that is feedback that we would share with our elected officials as they're considering what we need to do going forward. So again, as Stephen said, we do understand that there are costs to the end users of all of these things. And so it's a balancing act. And we do want to support affordable housing development as much as possible while still being able to provide the function that we need to provide.
And I'll add, I received an email question from an attendee about whether we could share out the slide deck. So I'm assuming that's something that we can either post it online after the meeting or could share the document with our attendees.
Stephen, this is Chuck. You might want to mention too that we will have this video up on YouTube for later, so anyone can go back and review it.
Yes, thank you, Chuck. I appreciate that reminder. Yes, so we do post these on our YouTube channel, Washington County YouTube, so you can go back and watch later if you'd like to do that as well.
We do have some more questions coming up in the chat. This one I'm going to defer to Teresa to answer. And so there's a question regarding middle housing development applications. How does the county plan on sticking to a 63-day review time period? Oh, you're muted, Teresa.
So these will be processed by current planning, and so I actually can't probably answer that, except that that is the requirement. And so we will be meeting it. Part of it is that the application requirements, and if people can take a look at what we're proposing and what the law allows, the application requirements are pretty well, they're a little bit less than what we require on other development applications, and they're pretty clear on what is required. So our hope is that that means the review will be a little simpler. There will also be some things that will need to be kind of worked through before the development application comes in and submitted as part of the application. So clean water services requirements and that sort of thing. So again, the hope is that we'll get the information that we need at the outset, and that will simplify the processing of the application.
And I do think it's important to underscore that it's not an aspirational 63-day goal, it is the requirement. And so that is how we intend to meet that, we'll be building that into our workflows.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think that just gets back to the need to make sure that we have funding available to hire the staff that are needed in order to be able to meet those mandatory timelines. So again, understand the pressure on permitting costs and fees, but we also do need to make sure that we can provide the service and meet those mandated timelines.
And kind of, yeah, building on all of those, the timeline, unlike the 120 days, which sometimes a developer can approve going beyond that. With this 63 days, there's not the ability to do that. So it is, as Aaron said, a requirement, kind of a hard stop. There is only one way really to extend beyond that, and that is through a board action where they determine that the county can't meet that for various reasons that are in the bill. But otherwise, yeah, it is a mandate, and we will be figuring out our processes to be able to meet that.
Thank you. We have another question. It says, will you be looking at flexing contract employees to handle workload peaks, i.e. have consultants on call for review of various expertise? I think that is a great idea, and it's something that we had talked about being able to do. The problem is finding people who are trained in Washington County's systems, essentially. While we use software that sometimes other jurisdictions use, it is somewhat custom to what Washington County does. And so bringing in somebody on a short-term basis, if that person came in with all of the skills, would be great. It's just really difficult to be able to find those folks right when you happen to need them. Where we have been successful, Casey talked about this earlier, was bringing back one of our recent retirees who had been a senior permit tech and knew all of our systems and knows what she's doing. And so that's been really helpful. Now, we can't always rely on our recent retirees being willing to come back on a short-term basis, but it worked out well for us in this particular instance. And so, yes, this is something we are very open to doing if we can find people who have the skills that we need. It is oftentimes difficult for jurisdictions. We can't really do just-in-time staffing because of the level of training that we need for our staff, but moving into the future is something that we want to be able to take a look at as well.
Yeah, and I would add, we have in the past used consultants for various plan review tasks, and so on an as-needed basis, that's certainly a tool that we have available to us, and we have used in the past, and certainly could use again if the need arises.
Right, and I'm thinking we've brought back staff or brought in consulting staff for current planning as well when we've needed to do that on limited term basis. And so, yeah, something we'll be thinking about going into the future. There's also a comment here relating again back to affordable housing that says Multnomah County provides substantial fee reductions for permanently affordable housing. And so that's good information for us to have. Thank you. And we can look into a little bit more about how they do that. Generally, if there's a fee reduction in one place, it's made up for by a fee increase in another place or an external funding source. And so that's something that we would want to investigate further. So we have another question. How does the county plan on shaving down the intake time for building permits? Based on our recent experience, 4 weeks sounds like an impossible feat. So I would defer this probably to Casey to talk a little bit more about, but I will say that I think at the longest delay time, we were at 7 to 8 weeks on the permit intake. And so we have managed to get that down to just under 4 weeks as of today. And so we continue to work through that backlog. And I think that, based on the progress that we've made and with our new staff being trained, we will be able to get that down to our target 1 week time, hopefully in the near future. So Casey, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, sure. So essentially since August, we were able to make the progress from about 8 weeks to about 4 weeks. So we are slowly making our way, and I believe we will get there. The things that I've put into place to make that happen are I have a team specifically focusing on creating permits. That's all they do essentially for 8 hours a day. They have some other things they have to get done. They have certain projects they're assigned to that they have to work on as well. But because they are focused on those tasks, it's able to move our timelines forward. I know from the customer standpoint, it seems like a very long time, but we're working really hard to get to our goal where it is under 4 weeks and hopefully to 1 week. I don't know when that's going to happen, but if you're looking at the trend since August, we've moved it 4 weeks. Maybe in another few months we'll be able to get there or even shorter.
Yeah.
And I think highlighting too, go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, I was just going to add too, I know based on feedback from some of our customers, we meet pretty regularly with the Home Builders Association and some of the builders that are members of that group. And so based on feedback that we'd received through the HBA, we had really focused initially on trying to catch up on the file check, which is that sort of final step before the permits are issued. People were, had their permits in the queue for quite a long time. We're very anxious to get those permits and try to get the last little bit of good weather here for our sort of extended summer that we had. And so that was really the initial focus of our catch-up efforts, was really working on getting those file checks back down within our mandated time frame, not our mandated time frame, our target time frame of 1 week. And so Casey and the team really focused their efforts there, but we've also continued at the same time really chipping away at what was an 8-week backlog in the incoming permits as well, and gotten that down to 4 weeks. And as I say, I have confidence that the team's going to continue pressing forward and catching up on getting back down to that 1 week target goal. And I think we mentioned it earlier, but we're also looking to add one additional staff position on the building permit tech team. Just again, now that we've made great progress catching up, we really need to make sure that we are able to continue to meet those target timeframes, and need a little extra support to keep doing that.
Yeah, having the 3 new staff, Casey, and then the other 2 new building permit techs, getting them on board and getting them trained has been really helpful in helping us make a lot of good progress. And so as they're being trained and moving through learning simple permits and learning more advanced permits, I think we'll continue to make good progress. The other point Casey made earlier was that I think we had at the highest number 750 items in the intake box, and it's down to 200 something right now. And so you can see that we're making a lot of progress on that backlog, and so it's easier to move things on going forward. So we hope to continue to make good progress there.
And there was another question about whether there was a mandated time frame for file checks, and there is not a mandated requirement for that, but our target is to try to get those to 1 week or less. And like I said, we've hit that target and are striving to continue to maintain that.
I don't see any other questions in the queue, and I don't see any hands going up in the audience either. Great. Well, I think with that, we can probably draw to a close. I did want to highlight one other item that I forgot to mention previously, which was that the county has moved to our new website. Some of you may have had some experience with that, and so that launched at the end of September. We are still in the process of identifying areas where it needs to be cleaned up. Maybe a link doesn't work how it used to work, or maybe if you are Googling a page you used to use, you're getting the legacy page and not the new one. And so we're still working through some of those challenges. If you are finding that you can't find something on the page, please reach out and let us know, and we'll be happy to direct you to where that item lives, or if it's something that's gone missing, we will make sure that it is reinstituted. And then I also want to mention that our next development forum is coming up in April, and I am forgetting the date off the top of my head. I think we had that written down in the agenda.
It's Thursday,
20th.
April 20th.
April 20th. I was going to say April 26th. I knew that was wrong. So it is Thursday, April 20th. And so we hope that you can all join us again in April. Again, contact information for staff is on your agenda. And so please feel free to reach out to any of us with any other questions. And thanks for being here today.
So maybe before we go really quickly, this wasn't part of the agenda, but I was just curious, maybe with a show of hands, are folks interested in trying to get back together in person for these going forward? Obviously the virtual format lends itself to convenience, but certainly I think we miss a lot of the interaction that we strive to get in these forums when we're meeting virtually. So again, feel free to contact us, email us, or let us know if you have a preference in that regard, and we'll think about that as we move forward to our April 20th, 2023 forum.
And Mike Robinson had his hand up. It looks like it may have gone down, but.
Yeah, I think maybe that was a show of hands for support to get back together. Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely something that we've missed is really being able to interact with folks one-on-one, and so I think look forward to opportunities to get back to doing that. So.
And we could maybe experiment with hybrid formats as well, and so being able to make it available to people online, but also in person.
Yeah. I personally find hybrid meetings to be sort of the worst of both worlds, but that's just my sense of it. Anyway, well, again, I'll echo Aaron's appreciation. I appreciate everyone being with us this morning and taking some time out of your day to do that. And again, don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have questions, concerns, input, feedback that you'd like to share with us. We definitely want to hear from you, and look forward to continuing to do business, and hopefully we'll see you all in April.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.